You know, there's certain things in your life that we like to call the first. You guys know what I'm talking about. Your first kiss, first time you catch a big fish. Maybe it's the first buck you get. I don't know. But today, I'm going to do a first. I'm sitting here on the deck of my cabin. It's about 95% complete. And I thought I would just break it in sitting here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan by having a drink. Yeah, you heard me right. Having a drink. And I can't think of anything better to drink on this brand new deck for the first time than something I drank in Michigan for the first time when I was a little kid. Vernors. Nothing quite like the taste of Vernors. And sitting out here in all this beauty with no noise, I just thought I'd share that with you. Have a good one. Well, how you doing, folks? In my last video, I built the foundation and floor system of this cabin, and in this video, I plan on getting it framed up and dried in. Here I'm measuring and cutting all my wall studs to size so I can build the walls and get them stood up. This cabin is 16 by 24 and will have a covered 8 by 24 front porch on it. Here I'm setting in the top and bottom plates so I can put the studs in place and frame it 16 inches on center. No, that's not a finished wall. I can get it a little straighter than that. I broke down and bought me a framing nailer to see how they work. I've really never used much of them in my lifetime, but this seems to be doing a pretty good job. And anybody with experience on these can tell that I've not used them very much. And here's my buddy Joe putting in 10 more of those helical piles so I can build the front porch on it and get it off the ground. The front wall will be 10 foot high and the rear wall will be 8 foot high, so we're cutting 2 different sizes of studs so we can have them to put in these walls. Joe went to high school with my daughter in Phoenix years ago. Him and his wife moved to the Escanaba area last year, and I was able to get him to help me a couple of weekends on some of the heavy stuff.
This is the other Joe out on the background peeing.
Just so you know, the camera is on.
That's okay. You can edit that stuff out.
Lots of measurements. But you know, there's something very rewarding and satisfying about building your own cabin out in the middle of the wilderness in a beautiful area like this. Joe was able to come up 2 weekends in a row, which was great for me, but in between those 2 weekends I got busy and I built this front porch. The saddle's got a couple of holes in it. I've cut this treated 4x4. I got to mark out a couple of holes and put a through bolt in there. So we'll just set that in there and mark a couple of holes in there. Try not to move it. Whenever you're drilling a through hole, it's always easier to drill about halfway through both sides, keep it straight. Sometimes when you're trying to drill all the way straight through, you miss it, and then it's a booger to try and get that hole drilled straight after that. So just drill about halfway through each side, and it usually goes in pretty good. See if we can get that lined up. Looks lined up. Give it a tap. There we go. Now we can just tighten it up. I'm using ground contact critical structure wood. This is yellow pine. These are 4x6 beams that I'm cutting. They're setting on top of 4x4 posts, which are set in saddles that fit into helical piles that are screwed 50 inches into the ground, and that goes below frost line. Well, the base for the front porch is finished. It's level, it's plumb, sloping towards the front for runoff, about 1.5%, 2%, like they're supposed to. Now all I got to do is put the porch on it. All the flooring on this front porch is ground contact wood also. This is 8 foot by 24 foot long, so I'm putting it together in 2 sections. It's 8 by 12. When you're marking these 16 on center, 16 is the center. You back off 3/4 of an inch, then you go forward 3/4 of an inch, and that's where your 2x4 will set. I actually had somebody telling me that they've set it on 16-inch on center and everything was off, and I said, well, that's kind of impossible. They said, no, I just went through and put it every 16 inches. I said, did you center it, or was it on an edge? And they said it was on the edge. Well, it can't be on the edge. It needs to actually be 16-inch on center. When you make your mark, back off 3/4, go forward 3/4. That covers the 1.5-inch dimensional lumber, and that's where it'll set. When it's 40 degrees out in the morning, coffee and a fire is not an option. It's a necessity. And I drank me 2 full cups of necessity standing by that fire. You can see the 2 8x12 floor frames going together here. When they're done, I will screw them together and they'll become one, and then we will attach that to the cabin floor. Everything under the floor system is treated wood. All the 4x6 beams, the 4x4 risers, that's all treated. And the closest place to the ground is this corner, and it's 28 inches off the ground. So I'm not worried about water or moisture touching the cabin floor. All this is treated wood, all the risers, the beams, and I'm going to put that up against the cabin floor. So I've put about 3 coats of paint on that. And then I'm going to put this Henry WB25, it's called Blueskin. It's a membrane that'll go between those two. So if there is rain or snow that would get on this deck and happen to run down that side of it, it's not going to even touch that wood. It'll run down the outside of the flashing. This is 9 inches, so I can go up that 2x6 and then over 3 inches underneath the 2x4 walls. And that's what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to run it down the front side where I'm putting this porch on. I have the flashing installed. It's a little wrinkled, but that's all right. Its main objective is to keep the water off the floor of the cabin when the deck is put up against it, and that's what it'll do. Whenever I'm building a deck, I like to use a spacer in between the boards, something about 1/16 of an inch. This is a screw, the same screws I'm putting in here, so I just set it there, slide this up against it. I do the same at the other end, and it spaces them. That way water can drip through it. The boards seem to last longer. I'm getting the deck boards installed. I'm putting exterior screws on either end and in the middle. Once I get them all up, I'll go up there and finish putting all the screws in. Here I'm cutting the 4x4s for my front porch. These will hold the double set of 2x6s that span 24 feet for my front porch roof. I've connected the Simpson strong ties to them so I can connect them to the beams under the front porch. I like these little levels that fit on a post. Level here, come around, we're level on that side. Well, Joe's back up for the next weekend. I've got him painting some of the siding right now. He's not only a good worker, but he's somebody at least you can talk to while you're out there. I think the trees got tired of hearing me talk to myself. Here we are building the structure that will be holding up the front porch roof. And as you'll find out later, it also helped us get that heavy front wall up. So we have it ratchet strapped to our trucks so that becomes a stable platform to pull against. We're going to hook 2 come-alongs to some straps that we have, some heavy-duty straps, and we're going to pull that up in place. We've got this braced at the bottom, so we'll hook them up and we'll get this wall stood in place. I got this run down and put a screw in it, even if it's not straight. We'll straighten it in a minute. That front wall was pretty heavy, so we had to use some ratchet straps and some come-alongs, but the 2 of us got it up. We've got it set. I've got a couple of screws in either end. We'll get screwed off at the bottom, and then we'll be able to set up the back wall. I set my rafter up on the front and back wall, and this is the 2x4 wall that it's going to set on. I'm making this cut across here, and here on this end. And this is on the low end for the bird's mouth. So this line here will lock in the back wall, and the line on the front will lock in the front wall. And then I have just about a 2-foot overhang, and that way it'll help keep the snow away from the back edge of the building. After you've made your cuts with your power saw, come back with a handsaw and finish these cuts. If you overcut these, that saw curve can actually start a crack that will work its way down your rafter, and down the road you'll end up having a cracked rafter, and this is one way you can keep that from happening. So just come back in after you've made your cuts just right up to the corner and use your handsaw and bring this all the way in. You end up with a nice pretty cut with no cracks in it. Here I'm putting in the bird blocking. Some of these rafters had a little twist to them, so we had to use ratchet straps to straighten them out. Got the bird blocking in, straighten them right out, so everything is fine. Well, it's a good morning to hang the purlins. Purlins, skip sheeting, same thing, but we're working in the rain. It's subsided a little bit. We just keep on keeping on. Make sure you get that first piece of roof metal up straight, and everything else will follow suit. It'll look great. Well, it's a good thing we got that roof on yesterday. Got the purlins in and got the metal up, because it rained cats and dogs all night long. It was falling everywhere. The whole inside of the cabin area stayed dry, except about 1.5 feet inside this front wall, and that's because the water falling on the front porch splashed in there. But it's all treated wood and it's drying up just fine. I'm cutting the house wrap, gonna start putting it up around it, and then put on the siding. That will keep all the rain out. You know, it's raining out today, and there's nothing more exciting and pleasurable than to be soaking wet from the rain and trying to do things outside. So I think I'm going to go inside and frame up the top part of the walls in this cabin. I decided to use 2x10s for the rafters because this is snow country, and I'm spanning 16 feet with 18-foot rafters, and I just wanted them to be a little bit stronger for the snow load. Now this is a shed style roof, and a lot of people will build the side walls from the floor to the ceiling in one piece. I decided against that Because of the type of siding I'm using, they recommend on the top and bottom of the sheets, they be nailed every 6 inches. And then you can go 16 inch on center or 24 inch on center like anything else. The reason I don't just run these 2x4s all the way to the top is there's no plate at 8 foot to nail them to. And then there's not another plate above that to nail the next one to. Even though this is not a load-bearing wall, I've got a double top plate. So I need to transfer these lines up here. I've already got the marks for these on here, so I take those marks and just transfer them up with a square. I can just take my square, set right here along the top, and I've got the 2x4 layout, so that's one side of it. That's the other. And this one, that's one side of it. That's the other. And I can take my Swanson Speed Square, put those 2 marks in. Now I can measure this, cut the angle in, and work on each one of these. And it's a whole lot easier to get these in when you're working with smaller pieces than it is to try and put this piece all the way up and double cut it and try and get it locked into your rafter. The front wall on this is 10 foot tall and the back wall is 8 foot tall, and that needs to be filled in. That's what I'm doing now. All the screws are lined up nice and straight. There's a couple of ways I do this. One is by pre-drilling the sheet metal. There's another way which I'll show you that I'm doing here, and it works just as well. And you can use that way if you don't have a drill bit. I start by putting the first screw in on the first sheet on the edge. I leave it up just a little bit, just like this one here is. I pull a string right to the middle of the purlin here, and then I stuff my screws in it right along that string line. That keeps a nice straight line. We got a pretty heavy thunderstorm coming in with high winds, so I think it's time to put my front porch roof on and get that taken care of. I have an 8 foot wide front porch, so I'm using 10 foot sheet metal on the roof. That'll give me a 2 foot overhang. I'm taking this video from my front porch before I close in the porch roof, just so you can see this beautiful white pine. Well, it's another windy day. It's supposed to rain this afternoon. I put my last 2 pieces of sheet metal up on the roof, and I still have a couple pieces of ridge cap to put on. My problem is I don't want to lean my ladder up against the edge of this new metal. So I come up with this little contraption here. A couple of pieces of 2x6 that I screwed together in the shape of an L. A 14-inch long 2x4s under them, screwed them together on both sides on this piece and the piece underneath, so they're good and solid. And my ladder sits between them so it won't slide off and it doesn't touch the roof. I've also taken a ratchet strap, hooked it to my ladder and around the beam, so that'll hold it in place. And this is screwed to 3 different sets of rafters, so it is pretty safe and it won't hurt the roof. The wind was whipping this tree around until it made a really loud cracking sound, and it was blowing it towards the cabin. So I took some chain, a tow strap, and a come-along and hooked to it. I hooked it up as high as I could with a ladder and got tension on it and got it pulled over about 4 foot at the top, leaning away from the cabin. It goes without saying that this is a little bit dangerous, but I really don't have much of a choice. So I've got some tension on this, and I'm going to take my chainsaw and I'm going to cut it down. And these are the kind that can go barber chair on you really quick. I used to log many years ago, and I understand that. I've got to be very careful with it. Well, looks like it worked. I have all the house wrap finished. I have a little wrinkle on this side. There's something about hanging house wrap when the wind starts blowing that makes it a little difficult. but I really don't care. It's going to work, and this is actually the first time I've ever wrapped a cabin in house wrap. I think that barn red Joe painted this is going to look pretty good. Only 6 of the sheets were painted, the rest of these are not, so I'll be painting these the first week of October when I go back up to the cabin. Well, I have most of the siding up, but it's time to cut in some windows so I can see inside. It's getting mighty dark in there. I did leave the very top of the siding off to let light in. It was one of the last things I installed before I left. Well, there you are. Hello. The cabin has 5 windows in it. I installed 3 of them while I was up there this trip. I will probably install the other 2 when I go back up the first week of October. This stuff here is called Z flashing, I guess because it looks like the letter Z. If you're going higher than 8 feet with your standard 4x8 sheeting, you put this on top and a lip goes over the bottom one and under the top piece of siding. And that way any water that would rain or get against this will go over the siding instead of through it into the interior or behind the siding, causing damage to it. So you always want to use this Z flashing whenever you're putting this siding together. Just kind of set it up there in place, find one of the studs, put a roofing nail in there. And you can just put one of these per stud. It just needs to be held in place. In your building projects, if you ever think to yourself, you know, maybe I should recheck that measurement, you go ahead and do it, because in 50 years I've never once seen a bad cut go in my favor. If I'd have went with my first measurement, I would have been 3/4 inch off on this cut. Just a helpful hint. And that little sliver of siding above the ladder, well, that's the last of the siding installation. Well folks, that's pretty much it for this video. We'll be back up the 1st of October to finish trimming up the outside and paint the cabin. That way it'll be completely dried in and ready for winter. And thanks for hanging out with me. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section. Thanks for subscribing to my channel, and I look forward to seeing you next time. God bless, and make your life an adventure.